Thank you for everyone joining us today. We have a very exciting segment of our webinar schedule. Today we're going to have Ask the Troubleshooting Expert. And by ways of introductions, we've got Alexander Ervik Johnsen, Citrix CTP, also working currently at Nutanix. I'll give a little more background on Alex. We're excited to have you today. And then we have our own Avi Lipp, who's our Senior Technical Consultant here at Goliath. So we're excited to get started. If we want to go to the next slide, Avi. What we have planned is several of you sent in some questions ahead of time, so we're going to review those. But then we want to make this webinar for you. So please share your troubleshooting questions. Maybe we should have called this Stump the Expert. So don't be afraid to ask anything. We'll see what Alex and Avi can assist with, but feel free to continue to submit throughout. We'll go through our ones that we got first initially. And then one question we typically do get is, will this recording be available? Yes, before the end of, within the next 24 hours, we'll be able to give you a recording in your inbox that you can review or share with others on your team. So first, let me just introduce Alex for those that might not know him and have been following him. Alex is an active blogger. He's a senior solution architect, technology evangelist, author, and speaker. Currently based in Oslo, Norway. We were spending some time talking about that beforehand. He's been working with Microsoft, Citrix, and VMware products since 1997 as a system admin. We first got to start playing Atari, as we learned. He's a consultant as well as senior consultant and product manager. Currently, he's a senior system engineer at Nutanix. So given his deep experience across all IT infrastructure, please don't hesitate to ask any questions here with Alex today. Thanks, Alex, again.
Thank you, Stacy.
So before we get into the questions, I did just want to kind of level set. You know, one of the reasons that we put this webinar on together today is we at Goliath get a lot of questions from IT pros like yourself, wondering what's the best way to troubleshoot some of these end user experience issues. And the things that we hear that is so challenging really often comes down to lack of data. And so when an end user has a complaint, slow logon, slow session performance, application slowness, it becomes extremely challenging to isolate the root cause of that issue when you don't have visibility in data. This results in a lot of finger pointing. Often as a Citrix IT pro, you've probably been in this scenario where you're looking at your systems and everything looks fine. You reach out to the network team and the network team says bandwidth is great. Storage team says everything is great, but the end user is still experiencing slowness. So how do you get a full perspective of that overall experience so you can prove root cause, improve the overall communication across IT teams, management, and vendors? And really the only way to do that is with objective evidence. And one thing, and I'm sure this will come up a lot, I'm sure many of you have felt it, sometimes you even have incomplete information or no information from your end users, especially now when so many are working remotely. It's really hard to understand when they say something is slow, how slow is it? Is it always slow? Is it random? Is it persistent? And so in order to do troubleshooting well, we often break it down into kind of 3 core areas that you need to focus on. And I think both Alex and Avi are going to talk to this today. When a problem arises and you're talking to that end user, at the end of the day, the goal is to collect as much detailed metrics as you can from that initiation point to disconnect, correlate that information to truly understand what that end user was experiencing based on their perspective, and then finally interpret the data so you can isolate and prove root cause for fast resolution. I think that's the name of the game, not always easy. So today we're going to open it up to both Alex and Avi and hear how they help clients and other IT pros do just this. So with that, let's start with our first question. The first one here, I think, I know we've heard it a lot here at Goliath. Obviously with remote workers, we were just talking about it a minute ago, but amongst ourselves is, I'll start with you, Alex. How can I, if I'm an IT admin, prove a user's home Wi-Fi is root cause of session slowness?
Yes, so first of all, you would need to figure out, so you said it before, Stacy, the network guys say that there's nothing wrong with the network, right? And so obviously the problem must arise on the home user or the Wi-Fi session that the user is on. So during COVID, especially when people were in lockdown, and you often have, if you had kids or teenagers, they were at home, everybody was using some sort of remote session tools like Zoom or Teams or whatever, and it's eating up bandwidth, right? You're probably, maybe you're sitting in a spot in the house that has bad connection, right? So a typical user is not an expert in setting up the Wi-Fi at home, setting up where is the signal best. Maybe he doesn't know how to access the admin console of the Wi-Fi router. You know, we have to assume that the user does not care about those things, and it doesn't have the competency to actually, and the knowledge to actually know how to fix this. So everybody who's on this call, obviously, and Avi and myself, we know how to sort these things out, right? But I have a wife, she's a teacher, and I have 2 teenagers. And, you know, my daughter, she has her room besides my office, and she was complaining just about that. She was on the Citrix session, actually, to her school. And I was like, checked everything that I had to check. And it was actually, this was a problem I had, because it was in fact the Wi-Fi. She was switching to her phone using 4G, and I was getting the bill, right? So I was like, I got some new Wi-Fi setup, and now everything is fine. But basically, there's a number of things that potentially can be happening on the Wi-Fi that is in your home, especially if you share your home with several other people, right? So is somebody doing Netflix? Is somebody streaming some live news channel? Is what's going on with the network? You know, you have all these devices today, like cameras and Philips UV lights and all this IoT enabled stuff going on at the same time that people are trying to work. And you know, troubleshooting this stuff is a mess, because if you're on a Windows device, you would like to see what the performance metric for the network, right? But speaking to a normal user, I could literally use my wife or daughter as an example. If I told them to, yeah, just look at that and see what's going on, they would like, hell no. So either you need to be skilled to find this out. So obviously, I think everybody that's watching this would be able to more or less figure out how to see what's going on the Wi-Fi or on the Windows computer, but the users at home would not. And at the end of the day, they are our customers, right? We need to serve them and make sure that whatever is going on, they are connecting to our systems. And Avi, I know you have a good example of how to troubleshoot it or get the visibility into how to see what's going on, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. And I think you were bringing up some points that everyone on the call has probably had to deal with, where there's end users working remotely. Who knows how many devices are connected to their home Wi-Fi, what those other users are actually doing. And it can be hard to, even though we may think that's the root cause of poor performance when it comes to Citrix, do we actually have that objective evidence to pinpoint quickly that it is the home Wi-Fi that's the issue? So what I'm going to do is show you within the Goliath console how within just a few clicks you can quickly pinpoint that it is a user's home Wi-Fi that is the issue. So if you were to imagine a user calls in saying, hey, I'm having poor performance, this is where the IT pros who use Goliath would come to. This is the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop session display, and this populates with all the Citrix sessions in your environment, both your active and historical. So if the user was saying, hey, my Citrix sessions have been slow for the past 2 weeks, you can then just search for that user at the top right. This will dynamically filter. You're then just looking at that user's Citrix sessions from the past 2 weeks. Then when you're ready to investigate into the particular session that user is complaining about, you can click on the user's name, and what will populate is a screen that has all the high-level key data points that went into this user's Citrix session. So when it comes to how do you prove it's a home Wi-Fi issue that's the root cause, you're able to determine that by just looking at these 3 graphs right here. Because first you'll take a look at round trip time, and this correlates for the time frame of that user's Citrix session. So if it was a session from a week ago, 2 weeks ago, all this is timestamped down to the second, so you can see, all right, at the end of the session, this user was having high latency all the way up to 1300 milliseconds. You now want to understand what was the root cause. And if it's a home Wi-Fi issue, you can quickly see that with this connection speed metric, because this is the amount of bandwidth that is available for receiver or the workspace app, wherever that user is working from. So in this case, where it is a remote worker connected to their home Wi-Fi, I can see that there is a huge drop in connection speed, all the way from, say, 53 megabits per second, all the way down to 2.7, which is not nearly enough to support a satisfactory Citrix session in most cases. So it gives you that objective evidence to see the user was having issues at the end of the session, and there's direct correlation with a drop in available bandwidth where they're working from. And this is a remote user. You're talking to them, hey, what happened at 8:43 when there's a huge drop in the connection speed? And then, just as Alex was saying, hey, maybe that user has some kids that are also at that house that are starting to stream Netflix or playing Xbox and restricting the bandwidth that's available for Citrix. So within literally just looking at these few graphs right here, you're able to quickly pinpoint if it is a remote user's Wi-Fi that's the actual bottleneck. So Alex, just as far as with the available bandwidth, typically, this is what we see often is if there's less than 9 or 10 megabits per second available, it's sometimes hard to support a satisfactory Citrix session. So I'm not sure if that's what you typically see as well, but we have these data interpretation lines here to quickly be able to pinpoint if it's lower than 9 megabits per second, that's likely the root cause.
Yeah, that's typically what I've seen as well. And I actually had, it's a couple of years ago, but I had a customer that actually was in, so it's an oil and gas company, and they had offices all spread all over the world, and they had ships as well. And if the ships were off the coast somewhere, and typically there was like minimal bandwidth to support the users on board the ships. It was typically like they were given 4 or 5 megabytes in best case per user, and it was horrible. The Citrix session was up and down, freezing, disconnecting, and yeah, it was a ruckus.
Right, and it's sometimes the users will just say, hey, Citrix is slow because that's what they're seeing, but we know that it usually actually isn't Citrix that's the issue. We definitely see more times than not it's potentially a network bottleneck, for example, as opposed to Citrix that's the actual root cause.
Yeah, and if you think about it, in these times at least, Microsoft Teams, for example, it eats bandwidth. It takes everything it can get. I'm not saying it's any better. And I actually had customers running Teams in Citrix sessions as well, and they forgot to do the best practices stuff. But even with the best practices stuff, it actually is pretty hungry for bandwidth. And some say that, okay, go onto your local Wi-Fi, put on QoS, because you can, typically all the modern Wi-Fi systems has you can say, okay, go in, QoS the video audio stuff, for example. But if that video audio stuff is within the Citrix session, it's only the Citrix session that is eating up the bandwidth, and it's not getting QoS, right? And it's back to the skill set of normal people working in other. They are not working with IT,
Right.
And more or less they couldn't care. They just need to work.
Right. Great points. And if time permits, would love to actually touch on, we have a Teams module that can actually alert IT and take automatic remediation action. So if a user does fall out of optimized mode within Teams, we can actually take, the technology can take certain remediation actions to restart a particular service so that they do have to go back into the optimized mode. So if time permits, we could love to touch on that. Stacy, I will pass it over to you. Guess just for the next question.
Excellent. Yes. So again, I think one that nags many system admins is, how can I prove root cause of a slow login? Alex, we'll start with you again.
Yeah, where should we start?
That's the problem.
This is something I've actually.
Asking.
Yeah, so there's a number of things that can be going on, right? This is something that we as Citrix admins have been combating since the early days, right? All the way back to WinFrame and MetaFrame. It is still a mess. And it can be a number of things that is causing this. It could be everything from too many GPOs, poorly written GPOs. It can be system is waiting for something else. It could be slow storage. It could be so many things. So starting to trying to figure out what is going on here is actually pretty hard. So it can be login times are slow. Why? Okay, I live in the Nutanix world, so most of, or I will say every customer that's running Nutanix or the combination Citrix on Nutanix doesn't have that much of a problem with the slow logons, because it has something to do with the underlying technology and how you handle it. If you have slow logons and are running on Nutanix, it's likely to be some poor configuration of the GPOs or something. Maybe you have several GPOs that are kicking in at the same time. So maybe you have the default GPO that has some settings and they're trying to over proceed the hierarchy. It could be repeatedly or intermittently more or less the logon process, because maybe there's some process is waiting on something else that is not on the Citrix server also. It could be user profiles. So in the old days with 3T architecture, when you have a SAN and all the switches and all the servers, everything is decoupled, right? So if a user profile is located on a SAN, it has to traverse the network to read and write the user profile. If there's something is wrong between the server and the disks on the SAN, you will get a slow logon. And troubleshooting that could be even harder, because we were talking about people doing the blame game earlier on. Then you have to talk with the storage guys, right? Or you have to talk with the network guys. And obviously they will most likely just say that, no, everything's fine. But something is waiting for something. And I'm not saying 9, let's say 7 out of 10 times I've seen for the past 5 or 10 years, it is actually due to slow profiles or some corruption in profiles or the GPOs. That's the most top list of problems I see with the slow logon process. We actually did a project 2-3 years ago. We moved the customer over to Nutanix and AHV, and they had 40 seconds logon times, and then we just moved it over to Nutanix, and it was actually down to 18 seconds. And then we did some tweaking, and we were down to 8 seconds. So, and we found out later, because we did some benchmarking and we used a tool, Glide tool, to see what was going on. And it was actually due to the user profile was reading and writing through the SAN and the servers and everything. So yeah, definitely check out the user profile where you're hosting the user profile, or you use tools within Goliath, which can actually pinpoint and find what's really going on, right, Avi?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can show everyone on the call exactly where to go and do that within the technology. So I'm back on that session display where, again, this is bringing everything, all the high level key data points that went to the user's session on this screen, but you'll notice a couple of different things. One, you have a mini topology view here so that you can see all of the components that contributed to this user's Citrix session. So the client endpoint machine, how they connected into the environment, the delivery controller that brokered the session, AD, and the session host. So in a single view, you're able to see the entire pathway of this user session. Then you have a logon summary breakdown. But for any deep investigation that's needed to understand a logon issue, which is a lot of the time, logons are not easy to typically troubleshoot, as Alex was just pointing out. There's so many different variables. Where you'll want to go to is this dedicated logon duration tab. And you can see across the top, we have a number of different tabs dedicated for specific purposes. So for a logon issue, I would take a look at the logon duration tab, where here you're going to be able to see over 30 different stages of the Citrix logon process. With other tools, you'll get 6 to 8, which aren't really helpful when you're trying to pinpoint what stage of the logon process or stages are impacting the logon. And so we have it broken down into a couple different areas. At the top here, you're able to see the logon stages from the brokering stages, so at delivery controller and also at Citrix Receiver. And you'll notice that all these stages are broken out where you have the duration and a quick Gantt chart so that you can quickly identify where the main contributing factors to a logon. So whether it was a drive mapping issue, was it a profile load or a logon script execution that was taking up more time than it should. The top right, able to see what's happening at receiver. Was there something that was happening at the client side that was really impacting the logon time? And then also at the bottom, you're able to see the logon stage details from the session host. So you're able to see client and server validation. You can drill down into authentication, where you're able to see which OUs that user was a part of, the domain controller that authenticated the user. And then for group policies, we're going to show you each group policy down to the policy name and how long each one took to execute. And I have this slide that I think really kind of illustrates how clients do use this information to quickly pinpoint what's happening with a long logon time and how to then remediate it. So imagine you get a notification, there's a long logon in the environment. You can see here that it was over 280 seconds. You then take a look at profile load, see that that consumed the majority of the time, look down to group policies, and drill down into a specific, in this case, drive mapping policy that was incorrectly mapped and added over 180 seconds to the logon time, which was completely unnecessary. And because you have this granular level of detail, you're able to quickly see where you need to focus your attention, make the remediations. And we've had clients that have been able to cut down on logon times by over 80% because of this level of detail.
Yeah,
Alex,
I just want to add something to that, because the logon time is to have this visibility that you can get with the Goliath console is just, because sometimes people just set some GPOs and they think, oh, okay, we found it on the internet, and or we were using the default Citrix GPOs or whatever you have. And probably most times you have to actually do some tweaking to them to adjust them to your own setup or environment. And if you don't do that, it will time out. Like dry mappings, right? Dry mappings could change. Somebody changed them without noticing the rest of the organization. What happens? It will just sit there and try to map it, and then it will time out, right? Which is not very user friendly, because they can go and make a coffee and it's still not logged in, right? It could be brokering time, the time it takes to decide which desktop to assign to the user. So maybe the system is, you had a logon storm or a boot storm for the system. It's going to be all these mechanics in the back end that is going on. And if you don't have the right tool to do the necessity and find the specifics what's going on, you will use 10, 20 tools to try to figure it out and spend a lot of time troubleshooting that you could spend doing other stuff, getting new systems up and running, new ideas, new what have you not. Right, so this is really, really important when it comes down to troubleshooting the logon times for the user.
Couldn't agree more. All right, with that, I'll pass it back to Stacy for the next question.
Yep, and actually, since we want to make it dynamic, I'll go ahead and ask this question from, oh, I apologize, Guillermo. I just butchered the name. But the ask is, let's say logon works fine and is performing normally, but users say that the slowness happens as they're working on the desktop. Can you also see what might be causing slowness in the desktop after logon? So probably for you, Avi.
Yeah, so we do have the ability to monitor the client as well. So we would be able to then give insight into that. So if it was something on the client side, or if it was more something from the VDA side or that the Citrix process, we do have both of those areas covered.
Excellent. We had a couple other questions come in, but we'll save them to the end. Since that was on logon, I wanted to get it in there. All right. Next question is, Alex, we'll go to you. How can I prove session slowness is due to a compatibility issue with Citrix Receiver?
Yeah, good question. And it's, if you think about the amount of Citrix receivers that Citrix has pushed out during the past couple of years since they named it Citrix Receiver, this issue is actually a long-standing problem, right? I had numerous customers over the years with global reach, Norwegian companies. And it's actually funny that this problem is around, right? Because you would think that 10 years plus would have done something to specifically this area. But my point is that back in the day, it was like we did a script that went in and checked all the devices at a location to throw back into a spreadsheet which Citrix clients were they using, or receiver versions were they using. And if IT spends all this time getting the Citrix versions up to date, getting them up to speed, patching, fixing everything, but we forget to upgrade the clients out there, it's like putting a diesel engine into a Tesla car. Will never fly, because the Tesla car is built on technology and software versus the old world, right? The way we used to do things. And it's more or less the same, because if Citrix patches something with the HX client or the HX channels, or something with the logon process, or something with something else within the Citrix client, it is most likely because it's due to problems, right? And it may cause slowness on the endpoint that the user is using because he has an outdated client, because it's a mismatch between what's sitting in the data center and what's sitting on the client's device. So it's important, nevertheless, if you're using a Mac or a Windows machine or a iPad or a thin client of some sorts, if you're not up to speed with the latest, that is the same with the latest in the data center on the Citrix side, it will cause issues. And making specific scripts is okay, but you have to maintain the scripts. If they do something with the APIs, what happens then when the API.next arrives? Did they change the APIs? So you have to rewrite the script, right? So it's all this things that could potentially cause you a lot of work, that you have to redo the work because you have to fix it once again. And after you get the information, then you have to start hunting down the user and get them to upgrade the endpoint, right? So there's a lot of problems that's still. So if you're on an iPad or a device that auto updates itself, it's not a problem. But if you don't have any systems that auto update the receiver on the client side, you will have an issue, right? And that's why, when in Goliath you can actually see all these issues firsthand, right, Avi?
Yeah, absolutely. So with every user session, and we're back here on the session display where it populates with all the Citrix sessions in your environment, one of the columns of information that you do have is what receiver version is on the endpoint. So when the question is, how can you point to the receiver version as a potential bottleneck with latency, you can then sort this by, say, highest average ICA latency for each respective session, and then also be able to correlate, wow, okay, it looks like we have some users that are still on receiver version 14, and those are the ones that are having the performance issues. So it's real easy to see that within the technology. Now, this is from a individual user standpoint. We also have more of a macro type of view, where I just navigated to within the technologies are automatic discovery and dependency map for Citrix. And this is most commonly used as a knock view. Have it up on a large screen, be the first thing that you take a look at when you log in for the morning, see the overall health of the environment. Because what's happening here is when we deploy our technology, we are automatically looking and discovering all the different components that contribute to Citrix, map them out, and show the correlations between these different components. We then add hundreds of modern rules that are looking for events, conditions, failure points, and thresholds that can impact user experience. And what's important about those modern rules is they drive this as a heat map. So as issues start to arise on individual components, they'll turn from green to red or orange depending on the severity level of that modern rule. So then you quickly know where you need to look and where you don't need to spend any time looking. Now, how I got here and what I was just about to touch on is we're talking about receiver versions. And sometimes you have end users, no matter how many emails you may send out to say, hey, upgrade your receiver version, they don't always do that. And in this view, at the bottom right, you can see here the receiver versions that are out in the field, so that you can then see, okay, what percentage of the environment is still on receiver version 14? Do we want them to be on 14 because it works better with a particular application? Or do we just have a number of users that we need to have them upgrade? And since you can see that this is something that our clients tell us is very valuable with so many remote workers nowadays. And then again, for the individual user perspective, right back on the session display, you're always able to correlate it with if a user saying they're having poor performance, quickly be able to see what receiver version that they have on the endpoint.
And it's a good tool, Avi, because I've seen, although you think you might have some automatics in place for the upgrade to get out to the end user, either via storefront or via an email that's being sent out, or if you push it out via some other automation tool. Very often I've seen that from an end user point of view, they get some notification on their screen, especially if they're on Windows, right? And they just, no, I cancel. Yep. And then you're stuck. And then they cancel it the next time, but they are complaining and doing support tickets to the support people because the receiver is slow, or they are missing some features, or yeah.
Exactly. And so, yeah, but to your point exactly, Alex, it's by having that objective evidence that you're then able to quickly say, hey, listen, we're seeing that you're having the issues. Please upgrade to this new version of receiver because that will potentially resolve the issue. So it definitely helps with that type of a conversation with the end users.
Yep.
All right. Next question, Stacy.
Yes. Oh, this is a good one. And it's not often by, I'd say, fault of the user per se doing anything wrong. We all just have our way of working. So Alex, how can an IT pro prove that it's the user behavior that's actually causing latency in their Citrix session?
Yeah, so first and foremost, identifying the latency via the network and why its cost is numerous ways of doing that. You know, it can be the ICA latency, it could be the network latency, or it could be actually the ICA round trip times, right? And you have to actually look at the end user's connection speed to find out what's going on, right? Maybe it's a person that's sitting in an internet cafe and is sharing the Wi-Fi, or in a hotel lobby. I know we're not there yet due to COVID, but we will get back there. And it could be actually that this is the problem, right? Or they are sharing the Wi-Fi, or their 4G networks, or even worse. So it's not an easy way to figure out if you don't have the right tools, because this ICA or the Citrix latency, it could be 1, 2, or 3, or either one of them, right? So getting to know the session, you don't know where the user are, because the user is given the opportunity to log on from wherever. Maybe they have a cabin, maybe they have a summer house, maybe they do log in the car, in the back seat, changing cellular towers. This is probably one of the hardest things to figure out from my point of view. Living in Norway, we still have places that has high latency links, right? Because we have fjords, and people live in those fjords, and maybe they didn't get high-speed internet out to the little place where it's 100 people living, right? Yet, or maybe the reception is bad on the 4G network, or maybe, it's still very hard to figure out. And I remember, I'm using real life examples. I've had customer within the seismic industry, where back to the boats, it's not the same story, but it's boats again. And they're still satellites, and until SpaceX and the Starlink stuff is up and running, it's still pretty not that darn good satellite links, although they've been better for the past 20 years. But what's the biggest problem with those links? It's that they have high latency to start with. Or you have users that are, let's say the data center is in the US, or in the UK, or in EMEA somewhere, or in Asia, and the user is on this other side of the globe, right? So if a user from Asia is connecting to a data center here in Norway, for example, which I know how it is, the latency could be still between 300 and 500 milliseconds, and it's going like this, right? So for a user trying to do something within a Citrix session, it's horrible, because it will freeze, and then you're back, and it will freeze, and you will write something, and then you will have this. Comes some letters, and then it stops, and then. So yeah, troubleshooting why the user and how it's the user's fault, it's pretty darn hard, because it has to do with what the user, it's not in conjunction with what we were talking about earlier, but it has similarities, right? Because it has to do with the network where the user is sitting at the given point in time. And within the Goliath tool that Avi will show you, there's a pretty neat feature that will actually show you what's going on, right, Avi?
Yeah, absolutely. So Alex hit on a couple of, I think, very, very important things there, is that users are going to expect to have the same type of experience no matter where they are. So they could be in an area that has a horrible connection speed, or they could be in a location that has the most amount of bandwidth possible, and they're going to expect the exact same type of experience sometimes. So you have the network aspect that's playing a role. Another area is what that user's actually doing within their Citrix sessions. because we all know that all end users aren't going to abide by Citrix best practices on what they should or shouldn't be doing within their session as well. So one of the unique features within Goliath is how we're actually able to break open the different virtual channels that make up the ICA protocol and show you what bandwidth is being utilized within these channels. So the way how Citrix is architected, again, there's virtual channels that handle different functionalities depending on what that end user is actually doing within their session. So you have, for example, the audio bandwidth channel. Was that user streaming Pandora or Spotify within their session? Clipboard bandwidth. Did they have a large copy and paste job that hung up the session? Thin wire bandwidth, which is the Citrix display adapter. Was that user doing something graphically intensive within their session? And you'll notice all these are both inbound and outbound. And this from the server perspective. So audio bandwidth in. Were they on a go-to meeting and talking into their session? Were they on a Teams call and talking into the session? Audio bandwidth out. Again, were they streaming some music? And based on the type of bandwidth that is being utilized within the session, you can then get insight into end user behavior and how that can impact performance. Now, a user could be doing their basic job functions and try to upload a large file into their application or into their desktop that just consumed a ton of bandwidth and hung up the session, and then all of a sudden they're just like, I don't know why my session is, acting up. They're doing what they should be doing, but it's just that they were doing an action that actually resulted in the poor experience. You also have users that say if they're waiting for something to load, they may start streaming a sporting event or streaming or doing a video tutorial. And just like as an example in this particular case, we can see here that thin wire bandwidth, which again is the Citrix display adapter, was being heavily utilized at the exact same time that there was a huge spike in round trip time. So just in this particular example, we can see here that round trip time is high. This user was having poor experience at this point in time. There was a drop in connection speed available at their location, so they had a poor connection, and they were also trying to do something graphically intensive at that same time. It was like the perfect storm. So no wonder that they then had that high round trip time, because with a drop in connection speed and then doing something graphically intensive, it's going to result in sometimes a poor experience, as it did in this case. So it's having this type of granular detail to understand was it something that the user actually did is often a blind spot in the troubleshooting process. But with Goliath, we do give you these details so that you can understand, what was that user doing within the session, and then be able to navigate to, say, the processes tab and see the specific processes that are running as well. Alex, I'm not sure if you want to touch on any on that before we move on.
You're making a good point here, because they will typically tell you only the bad stuff, right? That Citrix is slow or whatever, but they will not tell you that at the same time they were uploading a file, doing some macros in a spreadsheet, and they were watching something live streamed within the Google Chrome or Edge browser or whatever they're using. All these mechanics are actually causing the latency issue, right? So and if you don't have the tool, you can't pinpoint what the user was exactly doing at that point in time. And I know that Citrix has the session recording software, right? But for many, many companies, and I work with a lot of dark site customers over here, and that's not allowed. And in many private or public companies, it's not allowed to record a session unless you have legally said that to them when they started or joined the company, right? So trying to figure out what was going on is very often hard, because the user will only tell you so much, right? Like being a detective.
Yep. And a lot of times, if you ask, hey, were you doing anything wrong in your session? Oh, no, it definitely wasn't me.
No.
Okay, it was not me.
They were not doing this, and that at the same time.
Definitely were not. All right, Stacy, pass it back to you for the next question.
Yes, and this is the last canned question. So we had a couple come in. If you have your own questions, please do keep them coming. So next question, Avi.
Yes.
All right, here we go. All right, Alex, how can I prove application slowness is due to the application and not Citrix? This is clearly coming from a Citrix pro that spends their days defending Citrix.
Yeah, so we've touched semi on the topic, but you know, I want to go back a little bit because so this is a complex situation, right? Because it's like Avi said, 97% of the time, it's not Citrix that's the problem, right? It's some application waiting for some other application that is waiting for something else. So let's just throw out application. Take a healthcare application or a web application that is reliant on a database. And the database is sitting on an old school SAN, for example, a 3-tier architecture. It has to traverse the network to read and write the data, right? So if the data is not like in a Nutanix world, an HCI world, where the data is very close to where the user are sitting and working, you will get these slowness in the system. And you know, for the user, he only sees the logo Citrix and he thinks, oh, Citrix is slow, right? But in fact, I you know, back in the day when Citrix had an old tool called EdgeSight, it had some mechanics that actually made us kind of, we were thrown in the right direction trying to figure out something, right? But this problem will forever be there because it's a Windows application. It needs to talk to a database most of the times, and the database maybe, or the application also saves files to file share. And if that file share is on a Windows file server, there's another entity into the mix, right? So it could be all these different mechanics, and then you have to talk to the DBA, and the DBA will say, no, the database is fine. It doesn't have a lot of CPU usage. It uses a lot of memory, but that's pretty normal, they will tell you. I've lived through this. I lost count of how many times. And then you troubleshoot the Windows file server, and you're maybe not the one that is responsible for the file servers. So you have to talk to those guys, and they will say, no, it didn't have it. No networks problems. No. And then you talk to the network guy, and they say, no, there's no network issue. And then you go to the server guys and say, hey, what's up? Or the storage guys and say, hey, what's up? And they will tell you, no, it's no, you know. And another problem with this is that you have to go all these different types of groups within the organization to try to figure out. So you probably spend a whole day just trying to figure out what's going on, right? Because people are in meetings, they don't have time, they're doing an upgrade. So troubleshooting the application slowness is pretty damn hard, because at the end of the day, I told you, as I said earlier, was that the end user is our customer, right? And the customer is only seeing Citrix because that's what he clicks on when he starts his workday or her workday. And that is often the problem for them. But we know that it's a different problem because the applications are running in the background. A couple of years, if people didn't have Office 365, it was the Exchange server that was the problem, right? Oh, the Citrix is slow. Yeah, what are you doing? No, I'm writing a mail, and when I'm trying to send it or attach a file to it, it's slow. Yeah, because you're picking up a file from a file server, and then Exchange is having connection issues with the Exchange server because something is going on over there, right? So there's a lot of things that could potentially be behind the application is slow, and Avi will show you how great the insight he can give you with Goliath is.
Yeah, absolutely. Since we're pulling in all the layers of visibility down to the application layer, or all the way up to the application layer, if you will, we're going to let you know all the processes that are running on the session host so that you're able to then start your troubleshooting process by understanding, okay, you know what? I see that Outlook or Chrome is running very hot on CPU on that particular session host, and it's doing that for all the users that are actually logged into that machine. So that can be a starting point to understand, are there particular applications that are impacting performance? And you can sort this based off CPU, memory, and this you're able to, for example, with a Zen app server, you're able to pull in all the processes running on that session host so that you can see, all right, was it David that was actually having the performance issue? She's the one complaining, but we see that Sarah, Jim, and Steve are actually the ones that are using up all the resources on that particular session host, and it's all from that same application. Maybe we're having an issue with that particular application. Not to mention, you also have all the alerts where we're looking for application crashes, failures that you'll be alerted to in real time, as well as all the event logs. So whether it's an application or a system error or warning event that took place during the time frame of the user session, you're able to see that right in the event logs tab. And then as far as being able to, something that Alex touched on was with, say, a healthcare application, your EHR. We are very heavily focused on healthcare and actually are called the healthcare IT standard, where we're the only IT operations software company that has relationships with all the major EHR vendors. So whether Epic, Cerner, Meditech, Allscripts. And just as an example, with Epic, we're pulling in Epic System Pulse data right into the Goliath console, so that you're then able to see the backend performance of your Epic application. So you're able to see, for example, the average grefs, average block reads, DB and web requests. Then you're able to see the workflow latency within the application itself. So in a single technology, in this case for Epic, you're able to see the Epic backend, the performance of your Epic application, end user experience, as well as the Citrix delivery infrastructure, all in a single view. So being able to say, okay, well, I don't see anything that's wrong with Citrix right now. It must be something with the application. Is something that our clients tell us is very valuable to have in one console instead of having to jump around between a whole bunch of different tools. Alex, I'm not sure if there's anything else that you want to touch on that.
Yeah, this graph shows it pretty good, I think, because if you look at the DB time, it's almost zero, right? And so you can straight away eliminate that it's not the database that's the issue, right? Or the connection to the database from the application. And I mean, this is the key performance metrics you need to know or need to have in order to like get to the next troubleshooting point, in order to find the root cause of what's going on, right? Because let's face it, basic tools within Windows won't cut it. They won't give you the answers you're looking for.
Right. All right. Stacy, I'll pass it back to you for the next question.
Yes, and the next question is to kind of, Alex, how can I report on who is using Citrix, when and how? And this actually also relates to a question, so maybe add a second into here that we got into the chat, which is someone was asking best advice to baseline performance, because they're looking to baseline how performance is at home versus in the office. So I think it relates to this question as well, if you want to address both of those.
Yeah, sure. So doing reporting on who is using Citrix. So you have some information in Citrix Directory, but it's very limited, right? And the reporting function is not great. What I've seen is people have made some, utilizing the APIs, for example, to write their own reporting stuff and then collaborating those down. But there's no tool that's basically it just does this, right? And this is what you get. So I know that a couple of friends of mine, they actually made a script that they use for their consultancy company, but you know, you have to change it every time because you have to make it specific for the environment that you're sitting in. So you have to do a lot of changes to get it to work, right? So, and the other question was, again, Stacy?
It was, how can I use the metrics to baseline performance? Specifically, they've got users that are going back into the office and want to see what performance was at home versus the office.
Yeah, so that's a hard one because it, like Avi and I said, it has to do with several things, right? Because we don't know what kind of bandwidth or the bandwidth the user has at home, right? So it's hard to make a baseline for this is how it is at the home office, for example. It's much easier to make a baseline if you have like remote offices and then you have the HQ and what have you not, right? Because you can measure the bandwidth available over time at the robo site, and then you can measure the same at the HQ, and then you can see what is bandwidth requirements basically. And you know, doing that for a home office where maybe not the company pays for the internet at home for the user, it's pretty hard because it could be like way high and way low and something in the middle. Of course, you could do some baselining on the middle way, but you know, back to what Avi and I discussed earlier, if the user is sitting on 4G, it's in his car, or it's on a satellite in an airplane, sharing the link with somebody else, it's pretty hard to measure and do a baseline for the home office at least. I'm not sure if you have something to say, Avi.
Yeah, what we have a report that's heavily used for this type of a request. It's our end user productivity report, and where this really came into play was at the start of COVID, where so many people are now working remotely. Employers wanted to know more than just when the user logged in and when they logged off of Citrix. They want to understand, you know, how productive was that user actually being over the course of the day. And so we're collecting all the metrics that we just showed within the technology, and one of the things that our clients tell us is very valuable is our ability to report on all of them. And so with all of our reports, you can run them on demand, daily, weekly, monthly. You can send them up to different business line managers. And so for this one, where the question was track who's using Citrix, when and how, this report is going to give you all the users, their client IP address, how they connected into the environment. Was this an external connection? Was it an internal connection? You can always filter these reports accordingly. Then you're able to see the session start time, the session change time. So we'll take this first user as an example. Randy logged in at 9, logged out then at 5. The duration of his session was for 9 hours. Now, here is where the metric becomes unique to Goliath, is having this interaction metric, which is compiled of a number of different data points such as mouse click, keyboard input, generating ICA traffic, and it shows how much that user was actually interacting within their Citrix session. So here we can see Randy was interacting for 7 of the 9 hours. He interacted roughly 78% of the time. Max inactivity time was for 42 minutes, so maybe stepped out to lunch for that time frame. And it allows you to then, you know, with some of the Citrix idle designations, where maybe if you hit the mouse once every 15 minutes, you could beat the system. This is going to show you in more detail, was that user actually interacting within their session? Then you're able to see the particular published applications and desktops, and this is just one report that you're able to see that they were utilizing within their session. So gives you that ability to understand who's using Citrix, when, and how.
Yep.
All right, Stacy, I'm not sure if I believe that's the last question that I had in the slide deck. Were there some others that had come in, or?
Yeah, so we're actually at the top of the hour. So if you want to go to the thank you slide, Avi, we did have a few questions come in. We'll respond to those offline. If you have additional questions, you can email us at techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com. happy to pass that along to Alex. I'm sure they can find you on social media as well. Alex is very active there in Twitter. There were a couple questions that did come in about Goliath, just to quickly go through those. Some of them were, do we offer a free trial? Yes, we do offer a free trial. So you can sign up, go to techinfo@Goliath Technologies. We'll get you set up for a 30-day trial that you can leverage the software. There was another one that asked if this is a on-premise or a SaaS application. The answer is it's both, right? You consume Goliath Technologies the way you want to consume it. So we offer monitoring as a managed service completely from a monitoring or even an overall Citrix infrastructure. Or if you want to take it in-house and deploy on your side, you can do that as well. And we've got a number of packaged services to support you. Other kind of question that came in was how much does it cost? It is priced by element that we're monitoring. But as you can see here on the screen, just a sample of some of our clients, we can scale to some of the largest organizations like a Bell Canada or a Xerox or Liberty Mutual, but we also have an ease of use and price profile that allows us to meet the needs of small to medium-sized organizations. So we often encourage, don't let pricing get in the way. There's a lot of different ways that we can package it to really meet your needs. So with that, we're going to wrap up here. When you close out, there is a short survey. Please take a few minutes to respond. It really makes sure that we deliver the best content for you. And again, Alex, I can't thank you enough for taking your evening time there to join us here on the webinar. And, you know, I personally thought Alex and Avi, you guys had a great repertoire back and forth for our audience today.
Yeah, it's great having Alex on the line. We appreciate your time.
All right, we hope to see everyone next week. Thank you both. Bye, everyone.
See you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.